Hello and welcome to the Merri-Cast, the show that puts you on the fast track to confidence in starting and growing your business. My guest this week is Assim Ishaque. Assim is lots of things. He's an entrepreneur, an investor, a business coach, a speaker, an inventor, as well as being a non-executive director. Now, I first met Assim as a fellow judge at the Business Book Awards some years ago. And at first sight, to me, he was a sort of whirlwind of activity and friendly optimism. And since then, and especially during this interview, I've discovered that there are some really consistent values at his core. Understanding who to trust in business, accepting that business development isn't an overnight thing, it's going to take time, and the importance of quality and profitability in business when so many businesses are caught up in the frenzy of rapid growth. Now, as you'll hear, his journey hasn't always been smooth, and I hope this is one of the maybe intriguing things about his story for listeners. His 20s, for example, were marked by a succession of misadventures with employers until he discovered the joys of self-employment. So here we go with Assim Ishaque. Here's his story, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did.
So Trevor, I was born and bred in Nottingham, and I've always had a desire to be in business. And I think I really wanted to be in the corporate world, doing interesting things with interesting people. And after my degree in accounting and finance at Bangor University, which is completely different from my home city of Nottingham, which is where I still live, I got onto the HSBC graduate scheme. So there were 3,200 applicants, and they picked 32 of us. So I was honored to do that, and I think I was treated like a little princeling in the bank. And I enjoyed the training, but unfortunately, the actual job of working in the bank wasn't that great. I don't know whether it was the time or the place, but I wasn't actually treated particularly well by my manager, and I didn't actually get very much training. I got on really well with the people who were doing the job, and I was in the West Midlands at my first placement, and they were straightforward people, treated me like I was one of them, and I really enjoyed it. And then on my second placement, of course, I hadn't progressed very much. I didn't learn very much, so I struggled there, and I went off. I went to work for Aldi as a district manager trainee, and I'll be very straightforward about this. I have nothing to hide. I got the job. I was interviewed by the managing director and went through the selection center, and I told him I was dyslexic, but he kind of thought, you know what, I'll take a. I don't know whether he was trying to take a chance on me, but he believed in me, and he took me on. But as a dyslexic person, it takes a bit longer to learn a few things. And at that time, we had to learn every single price on the shop floor, uh,
Yeah.
which was fun. But I kind of got encouraged to resign. That's the nicest way I could say it. I was encouraged to resign. So then that kind of put a bit of a dampener on my career. But I eventually got a job working for the Ever-Ready Energizer battery company, which was it was a job. I mean, I'd got rejected by the best at that time, and you know, for all the great noises that corporates would make about diversity and inclusion, I was being rejected left, right, and center. So that was interesting. But I got into this sales career, and it was actually quite transformative for me because I learned about selling, and I learned about selling a high price product in a market where most people want to pay not very much. And I was selling to shopkeepers, to branded retailers, to wholesalers and distributors. And it was quite a fascinating journey. And I really got to see the value of branding and the brand and positioning. And I learned from my peers as well. And one of the things that I learned was about how the way you present yourself is part of your armory. And it was a really great journey. And then I went on to work for Virgin Media, selling telecoms. And that was a fabulous job on to get promoted to a national role, selling through the channel partners. And I'd been made redundant from Energizer, and then I was made redundant from Virgin. And I thought, okay, the world is telling you something, Asim. Maybe you need to work, maybe you need to find a different way of working. And at that point, I'd been given a nice payout by now Virgin Media, it was NTL at the time. And I took the chance, and my wife was very supportive, and I started working for myself.
So we've got so let's just stop the clock there for a second. So how old were you at this point then, and how long had you been? You described this in very self-effacing terms as sort of going from being encouraged to resign, a couple of
Mm.
redundancies, learning some stuff, around sort of branding and positioning. But how many years are we talking about where you had these kind of formative
I,
experiences?
I must have been around 28, 29. So before the age of 30, I'd been made redundant twice. I'd crashed out of a really good corporate career with great potential. My CV was looking very patchy. And so the thing is, now I can laugh at it, and sometimes if I don't laugh, I would cry about it. But see, at that point, the Disability Discrimination Act was just about coming into play, and if you were disabled or if you had any inability, it didn't really matter. People didn't really, yeah, well, the thing about being dyslexic is it's not visible, and you've got people like Richard Branson, he's a really successful dyslexic person, and therefore I- the only way to be is be open and honest about it. I can't hide behind it. It's not a shield, but I did learn later on that it was a very useful skill to have in life, and hopefully we'll touch on that later
So,
on.
so when you were going through those formative experiences, and obviously, our understanding of things like dyslexia is much greater, and that of employers, hopefully, in the most part, is much greater than it was. Do you think that had you not gone through those experiences, that you would have maybe not been in a position to sort of be aware enough to know that I need to follow the path now of self-employment? As in, did those things happen for a reason? Now you look back on it.
Well, great things did happen for me afterwards, but equally, I really, really wanted that corporate job. I think I did incredibly well to get that corporate job, and in those other places as well. I mean, any one of them would have been a great company to work for had I been more successful. I take the blame. Let's say I take the blame completely on me. Had I been more successful at the bank, I would be doing something really interesting, getting paid a huge amount of money. Had I been successful at Aldi, I would have done incredibly well. Had I been successful at Eveready, I mean, it was a new role. I took a risk, but I learned from it. I learned an awful lot, and for me, that's one of the roles that really made a difference in my life. And then Virgin Media, as it is now, and telecoms, it was an industry of its time when internet was becoming the power, the transformative change in society that it's now becoming. I mean, we can't live without the internet. I remember the day where I was working for somebody else and the internet was down. People basically went home because you can't do anything without the internet. It's so important now, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. I set up a magazine called this is back in my editorial days called Internet Business. I think we're talking about early 2000s here, aren't we? So
Yes,
so
yes.
so the whole dot com sort of boom and bust, or at least that first wave of it. And so this magazine called Internet Business. I mean, the title sounds as ridiculous now as sort of telephone business because obviously you
Mhm.
pick up a telephone or it's just or you use the internet. It's just a tool of what you're doing. So we're in that period now, early 2000s. So that was when you
Yeah.
founded. Have I said this right? Envirup, is that how you say it? I mean,
Yeah,
maybe you could
that's right.
tell us the story about how this came about and what inspired you to start it. It sounds like you had a supportive wife, as you said, but just tell us
Yeah.
more about why you wanted to do this and what it was all about.
I started when I was working for Virgin Media. I was selling through the channel, which is I was finding other companies that would sell our products, and I got to meet some companies that were selling energy services, and as well as many others. So when I was made redundant, I talked to everybody I knew about all the services that I could offer, the consultancy, the telecoms, the sales, the training, everything. But one of the things that landed was this idea that I could help a company with their energy supplies problem. And it turned out that company was involved with my last employer. but had a huge amount of property owners, and are actually one of them was a billionaire or is still a billionaire property owner, and that landed, and they said, yeah, look, we need some help buying the energy for these companies, and I said, yeah, I could do that, and I subcontracted it to one of the companies that was a client of mine. They actually did a really bad job, but I needed the work, so I figured out how to do the work myself. And in my first year working for myself, I think I earned two and a half times what I was earning working for somebody else on my own. And that led on to me taking on my first employee who stayed with me for about 10 years. We grew the business to about five people. We never really wanted to be very big because we were incredibly profitable. And I was quite happy with that. So we were an energy brokerage and then morphed into becoming a sustainability consultancy for property managers in London. So I used to travel to London, the West End of London, and pick up these contracts to procure, manage, reduce the energy costs of incredibly wealthy property management companies. And I had the insight of working for these really wealthy companies and the owners of properties and understanding how they manage their tax affairs. I'd walk in the building, the owner was there, but we'd have to get the contract signed. The contract that we had to get signed would go off to somebody in the Cayman Islands or Panama because the owner wouldn't sign it themselves because they weren't actually the owner. The ownership was in the trust. Fascinating experience, but it was really interesting. And through that process, I did some self-development and training, did an examination with the Institute of Environmental Management and Assessment, and then joined. So put the letters IEMA after my name, and then was elected to join the Energy Institute as member grade. You had to have 8 years of experience to become a member, and you were selected by your peers through a kind of professional interview, and then also gained registration as a chartered energy manager at the time as well.
Was that
So
something in terms of, I don't know if this is the right phrase, but so you were having some successes there, and then you were kind of thinking, what? You were thinking, I need to sort of retrofit with some qualifications for sort of credibility in this area to go on and win other business? I mean, what was the thinking at that time? Did you need to take those qualifications, or was
uh,
that just something you wanted to do for yourself?
well, because despite the lack of longevity in these corporates, I always treat my company as a mini corporate in that, we had clear processes. We behaved in an ethical manner. We treated our clients in a professional way. And I thought professional development was an important part of that. So I also encouraged a number of my staff to do the examinations with IEMA as well. And I think, yeah, for me, it was I wanted to differentiate myself from other people in the sector. And it wasn't a sector that necessarily had huge barriers to entry. So how do you differentiate yourself? I think investing in yourself, professional qualifications are important. I'm not sure whether it actually made a difference, but the training, the discipline of gaining those skills and those qualifications and that insight was really important for me and my colleagues. So it gave us a sense of greater confidence in what we were doing.
Mm. So at this point, then you said you're encouraging your team to go down that route as well. So there was a kind of growing team behind you then, was there? I
Yeah,
mean, and
yeah,
despite the fact
we were up to five people, five full-time people at our greatest, and I was quite happy with that. We were quite profitable. I wasn't necessarily super ambitious. I didn't want to have a huge empire. I liked the way we were working. I liked what we were doing. I enjoyed the clients, got on well with them. We were gaining referrals, so I was quite happy with that.
can I just ask you on that actually, because I'm very interested in this sort of quality versus quantity sort of thing about, I'm very similar to you in that I
Mhm.
would like a sort of profitable business that I have scaled up a little bit, but again, it's driven by quality rather than sort of quantity. I mean, there is a narrative out there, that seems to assume that everybody wants to just grow and
Yeah.
be bigger and so on. I mean, did you feel a pressure from that narrative, or were you just always like, was there a part of you that was listening? Well, actually, I could go out and get 10 more contracts in this area if I wanted to. I mean, was there a temptation there to follow the quantity route rather than the
Mhm.
quality?
Well, because I worked in these bigger companies, and I saw the politics that was around the bigger companies. I didn't particularly enjoy the politics. I had bad experience in the beginning of my career with really awful management, and so I didn't really want to behave that way. And I thought, keep it simple. And my family was growing, paying my bills. We moved on from our first house to a second house. We refurbed it, and I was able to purchase the house that we're living in now. I was quite happy with that. And I think, yeah, there's a lot of pressure on people growing their businesses. That I want to jump forward to recently, and then we jump back. I saw one of the people that I'd known as a business acquaintance who'd raised lots of money, and he's been lauded for raising lots of money in his business. And then I met his co-founder at an event, and I was quite surprised to see him. And I asked him why he was there, and he said, "Well, the business went bankrupt." I said, "What about all the money you raised?" He said, "Yeah, we couldn't do it. We couldn't progress." So, and I at the time I was reading Fortune magazine quite a lot. I thought it was really interesting to be inspired by the business people, and you hear these people raising money, and the thing about raising lots of money is it works for some business. It works for Facebook. It works for Amazon. It works for these kind of businesses that need super scale. But I think some businesses, they just don't need it. The average business needs customers. And if you have customers, then the profitability that you get from the customers should fund your growth. And if you're in a high tech business and you're taking big leaps of faith and big technological steps, you definitely need that funding. But if your fundamental technology is questionable and it doesn't work and it can't be proven, then I'm sure in this time there's going to be lots of funding going into AI, and that's not Assim Ishaque, by the way. That's artificial intelligence focused. But it took you a moment there. Yeah.
Yeah, very good.
Businesses, uh, there's a lot going in there, and later on, I did develop a couple of patented products, and I met a lot of interesting financiers, and they'd gone from great university internship at an investment bank, and then worked for an investment company, and they were testing me on what I knew about the stuff that I was working on, but they had never risked their life's income, their fortune, on working on projects that they believed in. They were always risking other people's money. And the average, this is me and my rant, the average VC investor, that most of them haven't really made any money out of the investments they've made. Most of them have lost money, and they're hoping for that super win. And I think I meet loads of through the coaching work that I do. I meet loads of startups, and I always tell them, go to the investors that know that add value beyond the money. So how does that link back to what we were saying? Yeah, I agree with you. I was quite happy doing what we were doing in our own niche, earning a good amount of money, and I didn't overpay myself. Oh my God, we always kept a good amount of money in the bank, and we would invest it in ourselves by taking on more people when we thought it was the right thing to do.
So this is a period of time where you, from around about 2002 onwards, and we'll come on to Simbrix in a minute. But
Yeah.
you're doing this business. You've got this team, but the focus is very much on sort of quality and profitability. I mean, what were you? Did you immediately think, yes, this is, I am a duck who is not out of water any longer. I'm in the water. This is what I'm. Self-employment is the way that I'm going. I mean, was it a sort of never looked back from the point of view of, yes, this is what I was born to do, or did you have any moments of doubt, thinking, oh, I'm not sure if this is working. Maybe I should go back to full-time employment.
I was quite content, but my mind did change. I did want to do something more interesting because I thought, as a consultancy, what's the legacy for my kids? What have I got? Where's the fortune coming from, or where's the wealth going to happen? And following on from my interest in sustainability, I did design a project to deal with the electronic waste because that was becoming an issue that government was focusing on, and there wasn't many recycling plants in the UK. So I devised, so this is where we use some of our money to invest in a business plan to build a recycling center. And we found some land. We designed a plant layout. We did all the technology investigations on what we needed. We built a business plan. We went out and raised money, and it was a £9 million funding requirement. I actually got the money, but the last bit of the funding was from a really clever Irish company who are experts in waste management. And he asked me one really interesting question, which was, how much capability out there is there out there? And we did that investigation because he said, okay, I'll give you the money. And there was more capacity in the market than there was electronic waste going to be available.
Right.
And we spent about 2 years on this plan. And I had to tell him. And unfortunately, his answer and my answer were both the same, which was there's no point doing this because you're going to be heading into a market where the prices crash. So we didn't proceed. But I used those skill sets and I went on an export mission to Hungary and Romania. And I talked about the things I did. And I actually did some advisory work around funding for other technology startups in those countries, which is a really interesting step. And I got involved with this bid to do some land reclamation. And when I say land, it was a mountain of processing waste. And I was supported by British government, that the consular officers there in one of these countries. I won't say which. You'll see why. So I built this consortia to bid for this project, and we got to know the corporate quite well. And they liked our plan, and then what they did is said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to do a tender. So they did tender, and we tendered, and we got shortlisted. I think it was a 10-year bid. My consortia from the UK, very capable. We got shortlisted, but then at the last moment, well, the last moment for us, the company that was running the tender, they said, we're going to change the specification. And rather than it being a service contract for 10 years, they wanted it to be a very speculative contract in that we would take on the risk, all the risk, and then potentially, if there's any reward, we might get some of the reward as well. And of course, we couldn't do it. So we had to pull out. But unfortunately, that complete waste of time. I later found out that the company that did win the tender actually paid for the tender. There's a
Ah.
word. So that it was like, I'd like to say it was envelopes under the table, but there must have been briefcases of
It
paper
it
underneath that
doesn't.
table because it
They
was a
they probably
big
weren't
contract.
even that subtle. Putting it under the table. I mean, it's
Gosh, yeah.
that's a really interesting sort of insight into that world. So are you telling that story because what that kind of put you off that particular area of doing business? Is that what?
Well, we got beat, but we didn't get beaten fairly. But I didn't learn the lesson. I carried on and I found another big project, and it was a renewable technology plant, and that was 150 million euros. And I raised the money. I got the money for it. I took the investor over from, a qualified investment organization, took him over. We did the due diligence. I did the due diligence before on the project with the owners, and we were about to sign the heads of terms, and the heads of terms would have seen me do quite well out of it because I would have got a slice. But the principal, the directors of the company, one of them was former military man, and he got spooked by the idea. Look, he's been working on this plan for a long time, that there's somebody actually willing to take it on. And he got worried that they were going to take on his baby and leave him without anything. And he would be booted out. And we really tried hard to explain that the reason they're investing in you is because it's your project. They're going to fund it. They're going to be the majority owner, but they want you to do the work. And he couldn't handle that. He kind of feels like he lost the plot.
Right.
Um,
Right.
so yeah, that project didn't go ahead.
So it's a bit of a there's a bit of a sort of thing that I'm sort of picking up here that you've got your Enviro sort of business and we've talked about
Yeah.
quality and profitability, but there's a bit of a a thing running in you, if you like, that suddenly you're turning up and bidding for this or trying to set up that.
Yeah.
Is there sort of a bit of a random X factor in you then that can't be quelled? In there that you just keep popping up and just trying things. Is this just a sense of adventure or mischief? What's driving it?
That's a really good question. There's a realization that I just wanted to do something more. So from my time of being settled and content, there comes a time where I feel I should be doing something more. And the thing is, I am delivering. I do get the funding. And the first one, we took too much time and we should have pulled out. And the second one, I didn't actually understand the risks in the person. The person risks are critical. And I think my optimism took the better in that situation. And then, here I go again. Because we're in this sustainability thing, I see the issue of old cold homes losing, being really expensive to heat. So I was looking at the solutions for that, and one of them is externally to insulate them. And I saw they were really complicated. So through a series of strange coincidences, I came upon an idea to actually produce an insulation system that was made in the factory, but it was simple to produce. So I designed this with my colleagues, and we started working on it. And of course, then the day-to-day business would slowly decline. So, the colleagues slowly go, and there's me working quietly on my own now. I'm now on my own. And I'm really determined about this because I see it's a huge problem. I see the government funding it as well. And the government at the time were talking about, investing in insulating homes. So I actually I got a small grant to do a feasibility study within Innovate UK. And I worked with the university and it proved that the idea would work. And then I got E.ON, the energy company, to support it as well. And then I got another little grant, and it showed it was feasible. And then with the university, I built a consortia, and E.ON were there. I built a consortia, and we applied for a really big grant, and we won a grant that was the total value of this expenditure was £860,000. So I won the grant, and I thought, wow, this is great. So I got a corporate involved, and they paid me as well to be on the project, and they would fund it as well. And they would. So here I am, with my energy and environmental background, designing and developing a cutting edge insulation system, right? And
Right.
I was
Okay.
working with I was working with experts in the field, and I would take this innovation earlier on to people who knew better than me, and they thought who could kill the project. So I thought if I took it to them, learning from the previous situations, rather than take it to family and friends who would say, "Yeah, that's wonderful." Let's take it to experts, and if they could kill it, then fine, let's kill it. But they liked it, and they thought there was room in the market for it there, and they thought this has novelty. And I was applying for a patent, so before I took it to them, and everything was in a non-disclosure agreement, so my patent could proceed.
Can
Yeah.
I just ask you at this point then that you're on this kind of adventure, if you like? You've it's come out of curiosity, on your part, and then you've been clearly very creative in terms of you're matching up a bit of funding, you're going and talking to this person or that person, and you're kind of assembling a sort of a momentum, if you like, in what you're doing. Were you necessarily always very clear about where it was heading, or was that not a priority for you?
Uh,
I'm just
Well,
interested
actually,
in that side of things because sometimes people really need to know what people talk about clarity of purpose, for example. They need to know where they're heading or why they're heading there. And it sounds to me as if you were doing all these things, but you didn't necessarily know or particularly care what the destination was at that point. Is that fair or not?
Well, actually, it's 100% wrong,
Okay.
in the nicest way possible, Trevor. Because what I
Okay.
did was I wanted to know that I wasn't going to get burnt. So I did that market investigation. I did the customer assessment. I got people involved that could be the consumers. I got people involved who were the regulatory bodies, the testing organizations. I got people who were buying the stuff and could install it early on to actually sense check it, and they liked it. So I carried on. So I knew that this was a real market opportunity that could be incredibly valuable. Not just in the UK. It's there are old coal homes in the Western world, so the thing had legs.
Yeah.
And the fact that the largest shareholder owned energy company liked it, put some money in it, was a sign. And eventually they gave me a letter of intent, which is not easy to get from an energy company, to buy the first 1,000 houses worth of product. And that was worth 14 million pounds of sales.
Okay.
And they knew the regulatory process. They knew that the government funding was coming through. At that time, it was 650 million pounds a year the government was spending on improving or retrofitting insulation and energy saving measures into homes. So there's quite a big market opportunity there. So we turn this innovation, this idea, this patent application and design registration into a fully granted patent, into a fully functional product, tested, fire tested, weather tested in the best labs, supposedly the best labs in the country for this product. And it actually went on a house. Now, one of the things that kind of bothered me, because I wanted to do the fire testing properly, was that our fire test scores were always lower than the companies that were making insulation boards. Now, my insulation material was the same content, but it was wrapped in a fire retardant material. And my insulation, my fire testing scores were lower than theirs, and theirs was effectively naked. Now, later on, it turned out through Grenfell that
Oh,
their
right.
their fire testing procedures, the way they interpreted, misinterpreted those test records were inaccurate. And when I was doing my fire testing, literally seeing my product, have these flames thrown at it, that guy in the lab told me, and because I was perturbed by this, I just so why is it that this is my score, and my score was really good. It passed well. I said, why are their scores so much higher? And he said to me, the reason an insulation board passes is because they put two panels of concrete board in front and behind the product. So when they throw a flame at it, it's the concrete board that's taking the flame. But when it's used how it's used. So in effect, and this is why part of the reason the Grenfell Tower fire took hold is because it was not used the way it was tested, whereas mine was used the way it's used. So I'm very confident that
Mm.
I was happy to let my product be installed because the test score was accurate. So
Okay.
it stands up better.
Okay. By the way, I'm sort of I'm always very happy to be 100% wrong, and thank you for sort of putting me right on that.
Not at
That
all.
there was a very clear then that you'd done your all your diligence, and you'd sort of really looked into this and so on, so that the sort of the underneath all the sort of the ability to sort of assemble coalitions together on things like that, there is a very strong sort of planning streak in you to sort of back up that
Mhm.
curiosity and creativity. Can I just ask you about Simbrix then, which
Yes.
I understand was inspired by your kids? I mean, you've brought them into the conversation, a couple of times already. So, I mean, just tell me a little bit about how that began, so that the listeners can
Yeah.
understand that.
Through the design and manufacture of my insulation system, I kind of got into this idea of stuff that and how things were made in factories and how different kinds of plastics are molded or extruded. And so that was in the back of my mind. And this project was a long project. It was a 2-year project. And of course, things just take a while. And my three kids at the time, three young children, were playing with these little beads called hammer beads, and they really loved them. They were really cute, but they would sit around the coffee table. They'd make these little designs, and they needed to be ironed together for it to be fixed as a design. And of course, they're putting these little beads on this board, and if they'd knock each other, there'd be tears, or if I'd knock the design, I'd certainly be anxious about it. And I thought, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a better way. And I was looking, and I couldn't find them, and it just bothered me. And unbeknownst to me, at the back of my head was this thought coming on about how a better pixel art product could be produced. In the same way, this insulation kind of came to me. It kind of just percolates in the back of your mind, and suddenly you've got something. In my mind, I saw this. this design that was a 3D design in color, and it was spinning around. I could see it. I can imagine what it was, how it would function, how it would work, how it would be installed, how it would be created. So this dyslexia thing was actually quite useful because, I was able to convince people to, capable people to come on board in my projects. And I saw this design for these little bricks. And I was sitting in a conference listening to some speakers, and it was frankly the most dull and boring conference. Or maybe I just had, too much chocolate or something, and I just drifting off. So I had my notepad and I started scribbling anything. And what I was scribbling was this design for these bricks. And it looked really good. And I thought, wow, this could actually work. So I took it back and I had a product design intern with working for me at the time. And I just said, "Look, hey, could you just map this out in the software?" And that started this process of designing these bricks. And 400 designs later, 1,000 customer tests, a patent application, a design registration, a Kickstarter campaign. A Kickstarter campaign actually led to an offer to license to an American company. It's a very lucrative offer. I took it, but of course, a new chief executive came on board. They hired a consultancy to do an evaluation, and all deals were off. But it was wow for a moment, but then it taken away. But I carried on, and it was actually quite successful. On Kickstarter, it wasn't that successful. We hit our target the second time round, but then when we started selling it on our own website on Amazon, it was really good. And then later on, I licensed that. I licensed that to one of the UK's biggest toy companies, Character PLC. Again, one of those companies that knew better, more capable, and they took it on. And it's now available in all the big toy shops. We have a Walt Disney license with Stitch, the movie, and there's another great movie franchise coming on board. I'm not sure if I can say, so I won't. But it's really interesting to see how my little beads in the four different pack sizes is now, I think it's 10 or 12 different SKUs is selling around the world. Won awards, TV adverts. They've done magazine giveaways. They've given
Yeah.
away products in shops. It's superb. And that's me, allowing my dyslexia and my creativity and my interest and curiosity to kind of just to linger and just have their own way. And that's what's come out of it.
I want to sort of, picture there you are, and you're in this situation where something's come out of literally something's kind of come out of just a kind of curiosity, sort of in
Hmm.
a way, in this case through your kids and so on, and then suddenly there's a whole other business, you've got Envirop and you've got Simbrix and so on. I there are entrepreneurs who listen to this who struggle a lot with, so they have a great idea and then they have another great idea and they're running two businesses or more businesses at the same time.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that? Do you compartmentalize, I mean, in your mind, or do you or
Yeah.
how do you go about sort of handling that? Because a lot of people struggle with that.
I don't know how I do it, but I'm quite good at compartmentalizing different situations, different issues. Just to clear the story of environment, that through Grenfell Tower disaster and tragedy and that utter needless loss of life, the manufacturer pulled out of the insulation product. So after the product was installed, after its fully functional installation, passed all the tests and everything, it's on a house and it works. They later decided they wanted to pull out, but they had a change of management. The owners of the company had changed, the chief executive had changed, and they saw Grenfell and they thought, oh, yeah, we don't want to get involved with cladding. Although my product is probably the highest rated, fire rated product in the insulation market of that type, and the tests are really strong. They pulled out. I think maybe they were worried that it could impact the rest of their portfolio. So that came to an end, unfortunately.
Okay,
So then the Cymbrics carried on, and I just kind of followed that through. Went back to doing some consulting work.
but
Had some really
nonetheless,
difficult times.
you are juggling various things. You've got,
Oh,
Simbrix.
yeah.
I know you're at the Entrepreneurs Trust as it says here as entrepreneurial speaker, coach, consultant. I've got a list of things. Yeah, sort of like,
Yeah.
it says senior research fellow and entrepreneur de Montfort. I suppose the same question still applies. Really, is that do you? I mean, do you enjoy the variety of that? Does one thing feed the other in your mind? Are you sort of
Yeah,
have you sort of
it
yeah?
does. So the Entrepreneurs Trust is actually my brand for my speaking work. And the reason I called it the Entrepreneurs Trust is because I didn't want to call it Assim Ishaque. So I used Entrepreneurs Trust. And that's what I talk about. I talk about the entrepreneurial journey. And I think one of the biggest challenges entrepreneurs have is how we deal with trust. So I've been, when I put some effort into it, I'm quite successful. I've done a number of speaking engagements in Europe, in the UK, online, all over the world. And I am a coach to entrepreneurs, and I've coached lots of entrepreneurs all over the place, actually, around the world in the startup journey. And I focus on the challenges and I compartmentalize because stuff takes time. And when you're an entrepreneur, stuff just takes time. And somebody who thinks they can just turn an idea into money quickly, it's just not possible. It really isn't. And you need to allow things to take a bit of time. If you're looking for certificate, so I had my product, my toys, properly certified and assessed by a global testing laboratory. That takes time. It just does, and you can't rush it. So, what do you do with the rest of that time? And Simbrix was quite small. I was graced and supported by a number of interns and I'd always taken on interns throughout my work companies as well. And I only took on interns who hadn't had work experience in the job that they wanted. If they had loads of work experience, I didn't take them on because I thought, what's the point? So over the years, I've taken on hundreds of interns, and it is hundreds because I've done some other projects that we don't have time to discuss here that have taken on lots. And I've helped loads of people get their first job in their sector. And my interns and have gone on to great careers. Rolls-Royce, Cadbury's, Accenture, some banks, some accounting firms. Some of them have started up their own companies. And one of them is now general manager of a multi-million pound company. They've been incredibly successful in not because I gave them that first step, but because they were determined enough to work for me for either not very much or not at all for that work experience. And often taking them on was actually more costly than it was valuable. But I thought it's important that I try and give something back to the world and society rather than just take.
Well, that's
So
I mean
I've
that's
not
just on
necessarily
the
been.
just on the subject of interns. Then I mean that's absolutely fascinating about all those people who have sort of come through your doors, learnt, grown, moved on, to sort of great careers, and but you've done that through the perspective of as you said, giving back. And I mean,
Uh-huh.
a lot of businesses unfortunately either don't use interns or maybe use interns for the wrong reason, perhaps. And so
Yeah.
I mean, is that an area that you think, UK PLC kind of really needs to develop further on or change their mindset on?
Well, I think they do. I think companies, small companies, especially companies that are doing well, need to because look, there are a whole bunch of people being pushed through this graduate route, and a lot of them won't do the job that they want to do because they haven't got the work experience. And there are a class of people that can do work experience and not get paid, especially in London in the media because their parents can fund that for them. And you get this underclass of people that can't afford to do an internship and can't get internships. And I think that's really unfortunate. I think part of networking skills is actually what you give rather than what you get. So we changed the articles of my company to be a for-profit social enterprise as well. And I signed the UN Global Compact, and I did all these qualifications. And part of sustainability it is environmental, it is economic, but it's also social. So I being involved in voluntary work and supporting the community for 30 years. So some universities they positively do not want their students to work for free. And I understand that. But equally, that some of those students can't get jobs that are paid for, and therefore they don't get an internship. Some have funding to do an internship, but they provide that funding after, sometimes after they've graduated if they haven't been able to get a job. Sometimes they have some funding part way as well. And because I was doing these stretching things and I needed particular skills, I'd get to know the universities. And, if some universities want to complain, if some people want to complain, hey, look, you've earned millions of pounds and you've not paid people. Well, they can complain, but they should go and talk to some of those interns I work with who actually were able to get into really good jobs because I gave them an internship in something which was part of their career path that nobody
Right.
else would give them because I know because they told me how often they got rejected and that nobody else would hire them.
Right.
And you should speak to the parents of those people that have got some of those jobs
Yeah.
as well and ask them what they think about it. And reverse that, I encourage my children who are, going through the university and now graduate and getting into their careers to go out and do internships as well. And I see some of the challenges they have as well. And I don't sort of make a lot of fuss about who I'm hiring, but I've hired lots of people and it's been helpful for them and it's been helpful for me. Sometimes it's been more helpful for them, sometimes it's been really good for me. But I do know that the most important thing for the interns is that they get value out of it so that when they go and apply for a job, they've got something they can put on their CV that's relevant to the job they're applying for. So they can say to the employer, yes, I've done this. Yes, I know how that works. Yes, look what I've done for this company. I have that experience that you're looking for. I have it. It's there. I deserve a chance. I deserve an opportunity to get paid work in this space because I've done that for you. I've proven myself. And look, I did it for nothing.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful for that opportunity, for me being able to give that opportunity. But they were grateful as well.
Yeah, I think that's a real example to every business. So thank you for that answer. I've got one final question for you, which is that obviously the point of this podcast is that we want to give listeners the confidence that they need to succeed. I mean, you're in the position at the moment, as you said, you're a coach and you do give advice and guidance. I mean, but is there a single piece of advice that you'd give for sort of budding would-be entrepreneurs as they set out on the start of their journey?
Yeah, I think if you look at where I've made mistakes, I've trusted the wrong people. And I think if you can be better at trusting the right people and walking away from the wrong people quickly, you're going to save yourself a whole lot of heartache and pain. And as I devised this methodology to trust people, and I teach that in some of the workshops that I've run. And basically, just don't. If somebody says to you that they can, check it. When I signed on, when I worked with this corporate, the guy that was my intermediary, it turned out he didn't have even the authority to buy a cup of coffee, but he made himself out to be a really huge, important person in the company. So when it kind of came crashing down, he was no use. His voice did not have resonance. And in some of the challenges that I've seen and been involved with, you really got to double check that the people that you're working with and the situations and the contracts actually protect you as much as the people that you're going to be working with. And the most powerful thing you can do is if you feel that it's not appropriate, if your assessment is telling you it isn't right, that you should walk away because you will save yourself a lot of wasted time that you will do something far more productive with instead.
So much to pick out there. Thank you to Assim, first of all, for being such a brilliant guest. After talking to him, I love some of the lessons that I picked up, and I hope you did too. For me, there was the importance of trusting the right people and basically walking away from the wrong ones very quickly. Then there was the desire for quality and profitability. I mean, a lot of people could learn from his words on that. And I was also really struck by the thoroughness of the research that he undertook when looking at a business idea. Many entrepreneurs fall in love with their own ideas and over time lose their objectivity over its realities. But Asim worked very hard to understand everything he could about whichever market he was getting into. So thank you to Assim, and thank you to you, our growing band of listeners. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd love for you to subscribe, rate and review through your usual podcast provider. And if you want to find out more about the Merri-Cast or our business, Merriborn, you can find us on LinkedIn. So don't forget to join us for our next episode. But until then, thanks for listening.